One night on the watch in the Persian Gulf, on a military transport, the whole sky went from pitch black of 2 o'clock to fully lit in a second. This went on for about 30 seconds, then back to pitch black. We called up the neighboring ships and HQ. No one knew what happened. Our best guess was a meteor. Second story was a couple years before the first. Cruising around the Philippines and see nothing at all visual and on radar. All of a sudden, we see a faint white light, about 100 yards off our port bow. Typically we don't let anything get within a mile of our ship. Grab the binos and head to the bridge wing, and there is just a little Banca boat with his outboard motor and the flashlight. Even with radar, NVGs and an infrared camera, we couldn't see this guy's little 20-foot boat in a 6-foot sea without lights on. Obviously more crazy stuff than creepy in my career so far. The people are the craziest thing you will experience at sea. Had one guy who wouldn't go outside the skin of the ship at night because the aliens would abduct him. Again, anything to report from the overnight watch? All pretty routine, sir. We nearly hit a rowing boat. Night turned into day for 30 seconds and Jeff was abducted by aliens again. Creepiest thing I've seen has definitely been seeing myself and other crewmates lose our minds on one particularly awful voyage. Everything that could go wrong went wrong, and we found ourselves without food, water, and sleep for a very unhealthy amount of time. It started off with auditory hallucinations. Ships are noisy, and when you're going crazy, you begin to think those noises are talking to you. I heard children laughing, a choir singing, and creepiest of all, a particular splash sounded like it was calling my name from the sea. Combine that with visual hallucinations, and then things get really terrifying. I was convinced we were in the desert at one point with sand all around us and mountains in the distance. Another crew member freaked out and told us we were about to run into an apartment building. The creepiest thing I saw was an all-black flying pig with red eyes on the bow. I think the scariest though was when someone was convinced we lost part of our crew overboard. It turned into a massive, delirious argument over where everyone was, even though we were all accounted for. That trip was brutal, and the captain put us all in a terrible situation due to sheer incompetence. Other than that, there was this one time I saw 3 gigantic ships in the distance with no lights, and they did not show up on ice. Suddenly they were gone. It was extremely creepy. I used to be an oilfield diver in the Gulf of Mexico. I'd say about 80% of the dives I logged were at night, mostly 500 feet and under DSVs. It's very eerie feeling sitting on the downline doing in-water decompression in the middle of night. I'd always ask topside to turn off my headlight, like a worm on a hook, just bobbing in the darkness. Right, long-time lurker. First time poster here. I'm no longer at sea, but used to as a younger chap. With romantic ideas spend months on end on cargo ships, mostly tankers, crude oil VLCC and refined product tankers, but with a little time in oil and gas and towing. I came ashore in 2017 with a Master Unlimited ticket, sailing as chief officer. My last ship was a self-discharging bulk carrier. Anyway, I digress. It wasn't so much about what I saw, which was creepy. I saw plenty of interesting things I wouldn't have seen anywhere else. However, I was second mate on a tanker, distributing refined oil products around the coast of New Zealand. A yacht had sailed from a port on the east coast, bound for another port just down the coast a bit, but it had disappeared. Solo sailor on board, aside from his dog. Nonetheless, the search proved fruitless, and it was suspended. However, 4 weeks afterwards, at about 1:30 in the morning, the Rescue Coordination Center would broadcast a plea at the end of the weather and navigation warning broadcast, asking for the yacht to make contact if it could hear the message and was able to do so. I'd sit in the dark, chain smoking and working on my 7th cup of coffee, looking out into the black, imagining the guy who's had a stroke or heart attack on board with the same broadcast playing out on his radio, while his dog ate his face to keep from starving, or imagining him having fallen over the side, imagining what it'd be like watching your yacht sailing indifferently off into the distance, with your dog in the cockpit pacing and agitated, unable to do anything about it, knowing you were in deep trouble and had a matter of hours, if that left to live before the cold got you, or exhaustion. Or imagining the dog starving and dying on a yacht by itself weeks later, listening to the same broadcast in the dark. The places your mind goes in the dark by yourself. They found the yacht in the end. The dog was still alive. Some 20 years ago, on the MV Explorer, since sunk down near the Antarctic Circle, sailing around the bergs and occasionally making landfall. We rounded into a small bay area, and there, amongst the ice and coast, was an unmarked sailing yacht, which is odd, as generally yachts have some identifying markings on them. To add to it, they didn't respond to any radio contact, and whilst I wasn't privy to the conversation, and it was a long time ago, some crew went across via Zodiac and were refused boarding. So basically a yacht, not a particularly large one, that was unmarked, was hanging around in the inhospitable waters of the Antarctic and didn't want any help or contact. Proper weird. I've heard a story of an oilfield diver, don't know if true. He said he once felt a current while down there and believed it was something very large that created it while swimming by. Not so much what I saw but what I experienced. I was once underway in the Gulf of Alaska during a November gale. Waves were up to 35 feet, with some rollers hitting 45. An uncommon occurrence on the diesel-electric ship was a Cyclo-Converter tripping. When this happened, the ship would temporarily completely lose power and propulsion until some electricians could reset everything. This happened during that gale. I simply can't explain how strange it is for the boats you're on to all of a sudden go so quiet that you can clearly hear waves slapping the ship and metal bending and flexing, knowing you're completely at the mercy of the sea, knowing that if the ship lost its bearing and went beam to there was a real possibility of capsizing. It's easy to forget when you're at sea that the only thing keeping you alive is a bunch of steel welded together. At that moment, I was fully aware, and it humbled me. Thankfully, we trained frequently for this and had everything fired back up relatively quickly. Another time I recall was when the ship took a rogue wave. They are absolutely real, and I believe they account for a massive number of shipwrecks. It was late at night and I was on the bridge. We were passing through a storm, and we're taking the waves off the bow with no visibility. As the ship moves, there's normally a pretty standard pattern. You ride up a wave for a bit, and then you fall down the wave for a bit. Well, we started riding up a wave and got to the point where we should have been starting or ride down, but we just kept climbing and climbing, and then it happened. We started our ride down the back of this massive wave. All of us braced ourselves and tried to find something to hold on to, but we all fell to the deck anyway. Anything that wasn't secured for sea fell down all around us. Manuals, tables, computers, printers, you name it. Our captain, who was sleeping, called up to the bridge asking if we hit something. It woke the entire crew up. Rogue waves are real, and they're terrifying. I can't imagine being in a smaller boat or taking one of them broadside. The bioluminescent animals, or whatever they are, in the water is pretty amazing. Our toilet would fill up with seawater, and if you took a piss in it in the middle of the night, it would agitate the water and it would glow sometimes. I am a recreational sailor who travels 4 weeks at a time at sea. I once saw a flame on the water, not 10 yards from me, just freaking burning at midnight. Ocean fires are a rare phenomenon that occur when flammable gases seep out of the seafloor and ignite upon contact with oxygen in the water. These fires are not a new discovery, as they have been documented for centuries. Surely weird as heck though. I was in the US Navy for about 10 years and have tens of thousands of miles at sea in an aircraft carrier. Countless nights on the flight deck in the middle of the night and middle of the ocean. Creepiest, a huge patch of the ocean glowing, like nuclear waste in The Simpsons glowing. I've seen bioluminescent algae of a few kinds, and this was nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Weirdest thing, hundreds of miles out to sea from land, and there was a massive fire on the water. It was like the top of a gas refinery, but on the water with nothing under it but water. Flame going a few stories into the air. Saddest, a fellow sailor trying to jump overboard. He apparently got a Dear John email and pictures from his cheating wife and decided to end it. We were on the smoke deck. He bummed a cigarette and then asked the time. We said 23 o'clock. He replied, "Sounds like a good time to die," and in one motion tried to launch over the chest-high wall with an opening to the water below. Luckily we were faster than him. We grabbed his legs and wrestled him down and laid on him and basically hog-tied him till their mates. Navy cops got there. Broke my heart because he was a good dude. I never saw him again. He got transferred off the ship shortly after. Not sure what happened to him, but I hope he's doing better. Funniest, to flying fish collide mid-air. I was smoking when we were in the Persian Gulf and saw the fish fly from a pretty far distance towards each other. I remember thinking, there's no way they're going to hit them splat splash. I was in tears laughing, but no one saw it. Everyone just thought I was a weirdo, but I got to see a miracle of nature law. This sort of qualifies. Former Navy here, somewhere off the coast of Italy, saw a very, very small boat, not much bigger than a rowboat, about 9 or 10 miles offshore. This was sometime around midnight. There was no light from land, and no other ships around. It had a light. Our ship captain said it was a fisherman, and the fish would be attracted to the light at that time. Imagine being in a rowboat about 10 miles offshore in the middle of a pitch black night, waiting to see what finds you. A dead human body. It was the tropics, and it wasn't in good shape. We turned it over to the authorities at nearest land. There were enough teeth left to identify it by dental records. Here's hoping the man's family got closure. In 20 years, the weirdest stuff I've seen is other people that work out here. There's about 40% of the sailors like what they do and are good at it. Another 40% that are good at it, but would do something better if the money was right. But there's another 20%. If they lived ashore for more than 6 months a year, they'd end up dead or incarcerated. There's no more west for them to go to, so they went offshore and became our problem. Not so much creepy as eerie, but being out in the blue at night, in a lightning storm in a slack wind. The ocean was very flat. No big rolling swells, just tiny little ripples. The whole world would be black, and then there would be a flurry of bolts, and the whole world would be silver. The ocean looked like nothing so much as aluminum foil that had been scrunched up and flattened out. The water looked like mercury, and all the little ripples made these very dramatic black shadows. I was drinking in an airport bar and met a woman who worked as a commercial fisherman on her way to Southeast Asia for R&R with her family. Real salt of the earth lady. She regaled me with stories about her work, all the good stuff about working in her world, all the reasons she kept doing it for decades. I asked her what the scariest thing she saw out on the open ocean was, and without any hesitation, she said, "Oh, an underwater UFO. I saw one rise up out of the ocean next to my boat and fly off into the sky." The matter-of-factness of her answer bothers me to this day. UAPs are often associated with water and often appear in this way. According to United States officials, there are tons of stories like this. Super weird. Empty boat far out at sea. I worked on the sailboat one summer in the Bahamas, and something that you see a lot when you're in the ocean is kayaks and life jackets floating around, and you always radio them in, but they always just fell off a yacht or something, and it's never a big deal. Once we found a kayak floating, and it had a fishing rod in the rod holder, which basically meant someone was using it. I was about 2 kilometers offshore Western Australia kayak fishing in the middle of nowhere, knocked a rod overboard, and didn't hesitate to take off my life jacket to dive in and get it. I chased it down a good distance before giving up. When I got back to the surface, the kayak was now a good 15 to 20 meters away, thanks to way more wind present than I'd realized. I barely managed to swim back to it, giving everything I had as it continued to get blown away. It was very nearly the end for me that day over a stupid fishing rod and a rash decision. I have a friend who works on ships. He said the single scariest thing he had ever seen was looking out a window and seeing a wave that he said looked like it was 100 meters high pass right by their boat and suddenly disappear. He knew about rogue waves, but he said seeing one that big and that close and watching it suddenly just vanish was so creepy and shocking that he was literally stunned for a minute. I was in a glass-bottom boat in the 1970s off the coast of Oahu. We were going out to see a pod of whales. The boat captain was a grizzled old Hawaiian sun-baked to the color of mahogany. It was an older boat, retrofit with a glass bottom and bench seating. He was narrating over APA as we left the dock. We motored out for about 30 minutes and the view out of the bottom of the boat was disappointing. Just long streams of bubbles obscuring the view. Finally, he stopped the boat, and the view was simply amazing. The captain pointed out a pod of whales about 1/4 of a mile away. They were cavorting about, diving and jumping. The captain was explaining their behaviors, but keeping his distance. It was pretty cool. All the whales suddenly dived and disappeared, emerging moments later, right next to our boat. They were swimming all around us, diving and jumping and splashing us with water. Children were laughing, Everyone thought it was part of the show. They were right there, almost so close that you could touch them. The captain told us how lucky we were to see them up close. Suddenly, the mood changed when they started bumping up against the hull of the small boat. People were sliding all over the place. Some fell onto the floor. Children were crying. Most telling, the captain had stopped narrating and had a look of abject terror on his face. I remember thinking what it must take to make this guy scared, and as he looked terrified, we should probably be too. Suddenly, as quickly as they appeared, the whales disappeared. They were just gone. People picked themselves up and sat back down. Mothers consoled children. We started back to the dock. The captain got back on the PA and tried to downplay the seriousness of what just happened, but there was a definite quiver in his voice as we headed back to shore. I was whale watching in Maui 2 years ago, saw some whales and had a great time. Hadn't seen any action for a while and we're heading into shore and one surfaced, not breached, out of nowhere, and we made contact with it. It emerged and hit the side of the boat, right where I was sitting. The captain felt it, looked back in my direction, and killed the engine. Most people didn't realize what happened, and he gave me a look like, did we just hit a whale? My girlfriend was with me and saw it too. I honestly think the whale was unharmed, but I spoke to the captain once we docked and he said that had never happened before. He was pretty shook. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.